Hello, my name is Gazira, and I'm going to tell you a story about the worst day of my life. It involves superstition, being far too trusting, and a complete lack of critical thinking in my environment. The background of this story starts when I was 5 years old. My parents got divorced. It was messy, as such things tend to be, and I would live with my mother until I was age 13. Then I would live with my father for my 8th grade year of middle school and the first half of the freshman year of high school, where I would live with my mother for the next year and a half approximately. And at age 16, I would transfer over to my father again, being old enough to choose which parent I resided with. The other part of the background I need to discuss is my history of both mental illness and supernatural belief. They intertwine and they work off of each other. My mother, when I was between the ages of 8 and 10, she dated a man, and his sister-in-law was my babysitter. My siblings and I would go to their family home, and we were very isolated. It was just me and my two siblings and these four rather evil adults. I don't like to use the word evil to describe a person, but in this case it's legit. It ranged from beatings to humiliation to threats of having body parts bitten off or cut off. In this time, I started developing, mental problems, and I started acting out at school. Halfway through my 3rd grade year, I was transferred to a special ed program at another school. And I would stay in this special ed program until I lived with my father at age 13. I had these severe mental problems, beginning with delusions of, not being human, being like an alien, for a couple of years. And I would always go back to having some kind of like quote unquote powers or abilities. They were never precisely defined. Also, my father tried to get me to become Catholic. When I was young, it was really easy to believe in Catholicism, in Christianity. But when I got older, I started seeing through the holes. But until this worst day, I had kept a strong belief that I had some kind of psychic powers. Even through high school. Through high school, I, I thought I had like dream premonitions. I thought I had like telepathic abilities. I tried telekinesis a lot. That never worked. In the Navy, I maintained my supernatural beliefs. I had a couple of like strong, close calls with premonitions and intuitions. They weren't enough to make a trend, but they were strong outliers. In the beginning of my 2nd year in the Navy, I had attempted suicide. And then I went to live with my grandparents, who welcomed me into their home. Now, my family overall, we were religious. I have 2 aunts who are deeply Pentecostal, and I have other family that was that is strong in Christian faith. This becomes relevant a bit later. Living with my grandparents was literally like coming home. I was welcomed with open arms, and I was allowed to stay in their attic with without having to pay rent, without having to get a job or anything. Now, in this time, I rarely left my home. I stayed in this attic all day, every day, for a couple of years. And in this time, my only social contact was with people online. I had met this really, really awesome woman. We'll call her Elle. Elle was a sweetheart. She was an artist. She was intelligent. We shared some of the same, like a lot of the same interests in franchises. But I was an idiot. There are going to be parts of this story that paint me as a complete idiot and a total asshole douchebag. But I'm not going to cut back. I'm not going to hold back on what had happened. With Elle also came a group of friends. I would play 2nd edition Dungeons and Dragons with them. But I was verbally abusive to Elle. Not like calling her stupid or anything, but I would make snide remarks about overweight women. At the time, I was like 180-ish pounds, and she was rather morbidly obese. I would make these jokes all the time, and I would make fun of, I would just say the stupidest things. Not to her, not about her, but things that were hurtful. It all came to a head at Gen Con in 2000 when I made fun of one of her friends, and she broke up with me while we were in Milwaukee. We weren't staying at the same hotel room, fortunately, but that also marked the end of my association with this group of friends. At the time, I was also pretty deep into New Age belief. I thought I had psychic powers, as mentioned before, and I was trying to develop them. So, around this time, I also worked at a job for a month. I quit the job over the phone, because I don't know why. So when one day I wake up and I see this thing in the corner of my bedroom, I couldn't make it out, but eventually I quote, realized it was a spirit. I would try to interact with this thing, and it got stronger. I began to see it looking more and more humanoid. Then during my when I was taking the written exam for my driver's license, I started hearing voices. The voices of angels, they claimed. They claimed that they were here to help me with my test, and if I listened to them and marked up the answers they told me to mark, that I would pass the exam. I did so, scoring a 91%. I started hearing these voices at home as well. And it got to a point where I started hearing what I thought were guiding animals, like an owl that would talk to me, or like a priest I had known as a child, always going through the Nicene Creed, God has died, God was risen, Christ will come again, that sort of thing. Now with no critical thinking filter, I encouraged this. I started staying asleep for 12 hours on end because when I would wake up, I thought I was astrally projecting and meeting an entity who played a drum and talked like he was singing, and he was telling me that he was here to guide me and that we're friends and to come up to him. So I tried. Also around this time, I was speaking with people who claim to be psychics online. I met this group of people. One of them called Geisa. That's the only name I remember. But they started telling me, like, yeah, I have this guide who's a wolf, and like, let me see if I can get these other friends of mine. We can work with you. Now, this is the conversation that would lead to the next 20 years. This is where the worst day comes in. There's 3 or 4 of them online over this ICQ shared chat, and they claimed I was being haunted by a spirit named Manu. They spelled it M-A-N-U for reference. They said he was a soul stealer and had like a head that was a skull with wreathed in blue flames. Me with no critical thinking believed it, all of it. And suddenly the friendly spirit who was saying, like, I'm Saint Nicholas II, you are Nicholas III, my heir. Suddenly he became this horrific, like, demonic being who was literally going to drag me to hell. The drum became this instrument that he would use to draw out my soul and store it in the drum to be eaten by him and his fellow soul stealers. Now, my friends on ICQ told me helpful hints to get rid of him. One of them was, take a glass of water in your room and draw 2 of these Nordic runes on every entrance to the room, and you'll keep them away. Oh, you didn't already start with a glass of water in your room? You're SOL, because if you leave the room, then Manu will move, and the wards will be ineffective. So that didn't help. Then they present a warding technique involving a Bible and a pair of scissors. They said I don't remember which they actually said. It was to place the Bible under my head or the scissors under my head, and then the other one under my feet, and that would protect me. I tried it, and it, of course, completely failed. When I went for clarification, they called me an idiot. And they wouldn't give me a straight answer. But they had previously to this had told me that Christianity could not beat Manu. And they had also told me that the best way to get rid of him was to not think about him. That's the only way to truly get rid of him, is to not think about him. And they also gave me this helpful little tidbit where when I wake up, he is going to be directly in my face, looking me in the eye. Because every time you look someone or something in the eye, they take a little bit of your soul with them. And eventually, this process will lead to my death, because my soul would have been fully removed from my body. Their assistance one day just ended. They called me an idiot and stopped talking to me entirely. Understandably, I felt abandoned and lost. I had no idea what to do. I was still dealing with this Manu thing. I was starting to hear what I thought was the voice of the devil. You know, and there was this like this girl that started appearing named Colette. You know, I would see her like in a dream, and she would speak in the voice of the Manu thing. The owl that had once been friendly was now like another aspect of Manu. I started having hallucinations. Like I thought that, you know, I was about 180 to 190 pounds. I thought I was like fat. So when I woke up one morning and someone says, "I have taken away your fat," and I saw my limb, my arm, like losing tons of weight, and like my waistline reducing back to what it quote unquote should have been. You know, what it would have been in the Navy. They would have wanted me at 160 or 150 pounds. So I ran downstairs and said to my grandparents, "Look, I've lost all this weight overnight through magic." Like I said, a lot of this is just me being delusional or just stupid. You know, I thought I lost a lot of weight. I started developing like where I would close my eyes to see auras. And when these people abandoned me, Manu got all the stronger. And I started hearing them all the time. And when I was astrally projecting, I thought that, when I was astrally projecting, quotes, I thought that I was going to end up stuck inside his drum. I heard his voice all the time. And I started withdrawing within myself because there was no way to get rid of this thing. It got worse when it started claiming it could like change my soul into the soul of an inanimate object like a carpet or a book. Of course I believed it. No one around me said, "Let's take him to a doctor." It was more like, "Let's take away his Dungeons and Dragons stuff because that's what's causing this illness. That's what's causing all this." Or so one day, well, at the time, my mom and I were attending a church. It was, you know, gospel believing, you know, where like the preacher's wife would say, "I talked to Jesus," like literally. And I wanted to talk to Jesus, like she had. So my mom took me to this church, and there was like a ring of these like parishioners around me, screaming and yelling Bible verses while I sat in a chair, withdrawing further into myself. And the pastor was standing with his face right in front of mine, looking me in the eye, yelling for this demon to leave. I kept getting more and more withdrawn, gradually becoming fully catatonic. Sometime later, when I was not as catatonic, the voices got bad enough where an aunt of mine, Auntie M, we'll call her, Auntie M took me to her church, where it was a much smaller affair. You know, it was just me, Auntie M, my mother, and the pastor of this church. But the second exorcism failed worse than the first, where I started like seeing like I thought I was outside of my body. My soul was outside of my body, and the demon Mani was possessing me temporarily. It was possessing my body and making it do things. So when, quote unquote, my soul re-entered my body, I'm like, "I'm Gezira's soul. Please keep praying." The pastor refused to do so. So then I then thought I was Manu. And when an ambulance had been called at some time, and when they were loading me in as Manu, I told them not to take me to a Catholic hospital because I thought they would be able to exorcise me. In this brief portion of hospital stay, I thought I was being like hounded and haunted by Manu. This thing just, it told me that I was a worm, and it was turning my soul into a worm, you know, that would only existed to praise this thing's existence and fear its wrath. And I recall in a brief hospital stay, like an actual medical hospital, they took a drug test, and Manu says the drops on the outside of the bottle are your urine, because your urine has become acidic enough to dissolve the plastic. A lot of what I'm recalling at present, I'm only remembering with some effort. It's stuff I've largely blocked out. After this brief hospital stay, my mother took me to a mental health facility, where I was taken into the inpatient unit. Even when I was being evaluated, the pattern on the carpet would start to turn into a gibbering skull as Manu kept telling me, you know, like, your chief sin is gluttony. And then I would see the word gluttony, like a Willy Wonka kind of font. He was like, there's not just me, there are 3 skulls, representing 3 entities or something. Then I next remember being in the psychiatric building, and I almost see Manu's face, because seeing his face would become a theme where if I saw it, I would go mad instantly. I started remembering, like having false memories of seeing Manu when I was 6 years old. Then I was put into the mental ward. I would stay there for about 10 days. For the first few days, it was just me and this inhuman shrieking voice telling me that, like, my life is nearly over and I was falling toward hell, which took 5,000 years. It was so deep. The pit was so deep. And you repeat your life over and over again, except for the last life where you realize what's going on and you enter hell proper when it's over. When I was, like, the bedroom I was staying in, I looked outside and the tree limbs shadowed against the blinds looked to me like someone who was, like, hung and being strangled. It was not fun. It's hard to explain if you've never been in that state before. After a few days, along with my mother still reading me Bible verses, my mother would read me Bible verses every day when she visited. But the staff in the mental ward told me, this thing isn't real. That's the first time I had heard that in this whole thing, with the New Age remedies, the wards, the 2 exorcisms. Finally, someone was saying, Gazera, this thing isn't real. I finally started to believe it. And I started coming out of the catatonic state. My mom visited me every day in the hospital. I was put on a medication called Risperdal, which is an antipsychotic, and I was diagnosed with psychotic disorder NOS. which is just when someone has like general psychotic symptoms, but no real diagnosis at that time. When when I was discharged from the hospital, I stayed with my mother for about a month, maybe 6 weeks. I don't precisely remember. And I was living with her, and I was still dealing with like the aftermath. I still heard the voice of the demon. I still heard the drums, the ceaseless drum beats. It got bad enough that I saw a fish pattern on a washcloth, and I was terrified of it. I would try to take a bath, but I would see this humanoid figure silhouette like looming over me, floating above me. I couldn't function. I could barely sleep. The medication I was on, Risperdal, there's a thing that certain like antipsychotics can do with your tongue. They can make it like wiggle on its own. And I was drooling. I was drooling enough to where I couldn't sleep. I couldn't drink anything. I would just drool buckets and buckets every day. Finally, I was shifted over to a medication called Zyprexa, which helped. My mother stayed with me every day of that recovery. And for the next several years, I would still wrestle with, is the demon real? Is it not? I now know it's not. Never has been. I would subsequently study it and learn more about like the brain, learn about how psychotic conditions like this occurred. And it kept poking holes in the whole demon hypothesis until it just fell apart. I also learned to vet the claims of people, especially those I trusted. Because that one day, that one conversation would cause me trauma and pain for the next 20 years. That it's difficult to explain if you've never dealt with this before. If you've... A way I could phrase it, subjectively, I faced an equivalent of Pennywise. I mean, I was literally, in my mind, I thought I was fighting for my soul. I mean, that sort of experience reshapes you. It changes you. You never are the same. That's the story. I don't know how to, conclude it neatly, but all in all, you gotta vet the claims people make. Because one day, one bad day, can completely destroy your life. It's why, this religious bullshit, these religious claims, this bullshit just pisses me off. I can't, again, there's a lot to explain, but I can't explain it. that's that part of the story. There's years in group therapy. There's a bunch of other stuff I've dealt with, but that's the story of the worst day of my life. Later.